within autism eligibility. Just a little fun fact, the infinity symbol that you see, the rainbow does represent neurodiversity. Sometimes you'll see a gold infinity symbol, and that specifically represents autism, as the chemical symbol for gold is AU. The looping shape represents ongoing growth and progress, which I think really represents these kinds of conversations, right? And then the infinity symbol usually represents inclusion and diversity with infinite variations and possibilities. All right, so here's our little agenda for today. We're hoping to just kind of talk about shifts in the area of neurodiversity and kind of how it informs our approaches to supporting students. So that's kind of where some of the reframing of strategies comes from, or the reframing of how we think about autism or how we approach behavior. I do have a few disclaimers for you all. I'm an autism consultant. I am not autistic. Our department, our autism team really places value on listening to autistic voices and being informed by the autism community as a whole. I am providing you with general strategies today. You don't have to do these things all at once, right? If there's something that you notice that you have been doing and there's a suggestion to make a shift, don't feel bad about your past practice. Just kind of know that this field is constantly evolving, and we do the best we can when we have new information. I definitely think that in my work day to day and giving these presentations, the main idea is really to just kind of give an awareness of the shifts and just to build more compassion and understanding about what we do see in our kids. So just a little on that black square that says neurodiversity affirming is not a certification you gain, but a continuous commitment. It's very much like other social justice movements, right? Like to be anti-racist is an ongoing learning experience. This is very much the same. And when we think about being affirming in terms of, autistic students or neurodivergent individuals, we're not only looking at improving the environments for our students, our young students, but we're also thinking about adults, right? Autistic adults, and what do they need in the workplace, right? And how can we shift those environments as well? This is just a little bit about me. I've been in the field since 1997. I started back in New York in an ABA program. So we used applied behavior analysis. It was a preschool program in the 90s. That was a big deal in terms of how, a lot of this kind of discussion got started and awareness about autism. But I've been with the ESD as an autism consultant since 2016. Working in Southern Oregon. And then prior to that, I was working and living in New York City for about 20 years. I was in non-public schools, so state-approved, funded non-public schools, and then private schools, also working in homes and in the community with kids, basically pre-K up through 21 and over. Just a little information about language and kind of thinking about person first versus identity first language. There's a lot of studies that polled the autistic community. So autistic individuals, parents, caregivers, and what they found was really that people were gravitating toward content that used identity first language. The majority of folks were gravitating towards that. But if you were like me and you were getting your master's degree in like late 90s, early 2000, person first language was huge, right? So I am a person with autism, but the community has really shifted in terms of their preferences. So often we hear people say, I am autistic, or you'll hear me say I may flip-flop back and forth and say, autistic individuals or a person with an autism eligibility. What I would say just bottom line is that language is individual, right? So just how we would ask someone about their pronouns or the name that they want to be called, we may ask a family or a caregiver or an individual how they refer to their student or how they refer to themselves. So if I have a student who I'm just meeting and I'm, talking to the family, I might say like, hey, like, have you talked about autism? Like, does the student know that they have an autism eligibility, and how do you refer to them when you're talking about them? So just keep in mind that it's individual. And the other piece is functioning labels, right? So the medical model currently has 3 levels of functioning, and level 1 is considered like low support, level 2 medium support, and then level 3 is higher support. So those are the students that have more significant behaviors. Maybe they are not using a communication system, or they're not using spoken word, right, to communicate. And, in the past, we've heard, functioning labels like high functioning or low functioning. And the important thing to remember is that when we have those kinds of labels, it's based in ableism, right? And it's based in kind of society placing a value on a person's ability to contribute or to do work, right? So society places value on the ability for an individual to communicate through spoken language. However, affirming practices are going to honor autonomy and all forms of communication. There are some autistic individuals that will say, when I go to the emergency room, I may upfront say I am a level 2 autistic, because that is language that a medical person would understand and would be able to support them accordingly in a medical situation. But we just need to remember that, we should not have stereotypical expectations, either expectations of what students should be able to do, right, based on what level of support they need, or what they are not able to do. And I've seen kind of both of those things happen, where there are students that are pretty capable, and there's kind of this assumption that maybe they don't need as much support, or that they should be able to do these things consistently because they're only a level 1 low support student. Just a couple, I want to just kind of give some people vocabulary. So this is just a couple of graphics from Sunny Jane Weiss, also known as lived experience educator. There's the neurodivergent umbrella, right? So we have all of these diagnoses or medical conditions, which include autism. It includes ADHD. Those are the ones that people often think of when they hear the word neurodivergent, but there's a lot of things that fall under this umbrella, and this is not inclusive of everything. What we would say is an individual is neurodivergent. So on the left, you see that top row of little people. They each have a neurodivergent condition, right, or a diagnosis. When we're talking about a group of people, we would say the group is neurodiverse, right, if it includes different functioning brains, along with a neurotypical person. So most of our classrooms, most of our community settings are neurodiverse, because there's just a lot of different people with a lot of different brains coming together as a group. And then I just have some other additional definitions here. The ones that I'd like to highlight are neurotypical, right? So neurotypical is a term used to describe an individual who's functioning in what society would say is the dominant norm, right? So people who are neurotypical are rewarded in terms of their worth. So that's something that a societal construct has just developed, and people place more worth on neurotypical individuals. Neuronormativity is that set of standards that society has created, a certain set of expectations and norms that kind of dictate like the right way to function. And when people diverge outside of that with a diagnosis that is under that neurodivergent umbrella, it has become a disorder, right? So that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about neuronormativity and those expectations, and how that connects really tightly with ableism, and all of those constructs. Neurodiversity just refers to the diversity of all brains. So that's just, all brains are different. And I just have a few examples here of neuronormativity. So kind of all of those expectations, like where value is placed, right? Value is placed on spoken communication, value is placed on being independent, right? And being able to self-regulate and being able to contribute during, 9 to 5 work hours, right? Following those kinds of expectations that society has put value on are examples of neuronormativity. Just want to highlight this is really what's informing a lot of our work at the ESD in the autism department. Obviously, we value research and clinical evidence, right? There's a number of evidence-based practices that have shown that they're effective, they're supportive, they're producing great results for autistic individuals. However, we also need to consider the lived experience of folks who are maybe previously, now adults undergoing some of those evidence-based practices. So the more we learn, it better informs our practice. I will caution you if you are lurking in social media spaces where there's conversations about neurodiversity and autism affirming practices. Often what we're finding is the loudest voices are the ones that are amplifying some of these conversations, and it's really leaving out, kids with high support needs, their families. Those voices are not being put up front. So when we're considering, listening to lived experience, we want to make sure that we're listening to all of the lived experience, seeking out intersectional identities, right? Looking at individuals who are both speaking and speaking using alternative forms of communication, looking at the overlap or the intersectionality of autistic individuals with the Black community, autistic individuals with the LGBTQ plus community, and making sure that we're understanding those differences in experience. So getting a really full picture so that we can better support our students. This is just kind of to give us an idea of where we came from. So the pathology paradigm or the medical model has really focused on the fact that there is a societal idea that there is a normal brain, right? And when people are diverging outside of that, they may need to be fixed. And that's where a lot of the work that Ivar Lovaas, did a lot of research. He did a lot of work within the field of ABA, applied behavior analysis. This is using behavior correction, behavior techniques to help kids be more compliant and develop skills. That is what was happening with the Young Autism Project. They were really, this little graphic on the right, the Scream Slap in Love, is from Life magazine back in the 60s. And he really felt that he could hold kids accountable for their behavior, right? And push them towards being normal and being indistinguishable from their peers. And that really kicked off the ABA movement as we know it, right? And I'm a behavior analyst, so I live in that world. I was in a preschool clinic, and I can tell you in the late 90s, every parent wanted their child to be, fixed or cured or something along those lines, right? They wanted to be able to go to a regular education setting and not be noticeable and not have those behaviors. So when we learn about the history of ABA and the other work that Lovaas did, we learned that he was also doing research for conversion therapy. So he had the Young Feminine Boy Project, and he was taking, young boys who had feminine characteristics and using behavior techniques that we would call conversion therapy, right? To, reduce those behaviors. Those behaviors were targeted for reduction. So knowing where we came from, right, this helps us inform our practice. It helps us understand kind of why, there's such a lot of discussion around how ABA is harmful. So both things can be true, right? We can say, hey, the medical model is probably not the best, right? The DSM-5 is probably problematic for many in terms of trying to make people normal or follow social constructs. But we also need to recognize that the most vulnerable within the autistic community, those voices and those needs need to be brought forward because we have to take care of the most vulnerable, right, for our society to be successful. So we need to make sure that we are balancing those perspectives, right? Because if our families who have the highest support needs don't have access to behavior support services, their world is going to become significantly smaller, right? So behaviors that prevent people from going out in the community, that's a quality of life issue for everyone, right? So kind of staying in the middle here, balancing those perspectives, like, yes, we need to be informed by lived experience, but yes, these people also need services. So what we need to do is look at the individual in front of us and as a team decide like what is the best path, right, for success, for autonomy, for self-advocacy, and take it and go from there. This is part of my work is I'm part of the team that is the statewide professional learning team for autism. And this graphic is going to be in our new technical assistance paper for evaluations. So kind of thinking about how we're writing about students, right? So if you're doing evaluations or maybe you're writing about your students in their present levels, kind of thinking about how you can frame some of those challenges as strengths, knowing that a challenge can absolutely be a strength in one setting, and then a strength can be a challenge given a different context. So these are just some examples of kind of reframing those characteristics so that we're not always writing about our students with this deficit-based language. This just helps build a little bit more positive views of our students and just highlighting what are strengths. So, when we are talking about our highest support needs students, and maybe some students that have lower support needs, but when we're deciding what needs to be targeted, right? Like what do we need to teach, or maybe what does need to be targeted for reduction, making sure that we're choosing those things with intention, right? So this little graphic on the left are some of the things that have previously been targeted for reduction through ABA or kind of through that deficit-based model. So self-stimulatory behaviors, hand flapping, those kinds of things are what we now know to be autistic joy, right? Or a way to regulate themselves. So making sure that we are not, restricting that in any way, but rather educating the people around us about what that means when we see those things happening. Some other things are just echolalia, knowing that kids are communicating in different ways, and echolalia is a form of communication if we look and investigate context clues in the environment. So it's important to consider those kinds of nuances when we're looking at behavior. If it's not a health and safety concern, maybe we leave it alone, right? Maybe that's just the way that our student expresses joy. But for students that do really require higher support, more intensive interventions, there is a more compassionate approach to some of the ABA methodology. That's skill-based treatment. And Greg Hanley is an awesome behavior analyst that has been working on this model and really kind of looking at some of those basic skills, teaching kids to really trust their environment, trust the adults around them, to be able to feel safe enough to give up a very preferred item, right? A comfort item, so that we eventually can accept no. We can wait, just a few seconds after making requests, accept transitions, accept turn taking, and then we can actually branch out into what we actually need to learn for school, right? So this is a very systematic process, a very specific process that we would follow. But we do have some folks at the ESD that are able to, carry out some of this work. So I want to shift into supports and strategies and just give you some ideas and thoughts around how to support our students. What I want to highlight is that, this little graphic on the left is really like, let's look below the surface, right? Look below or beyond what we're seeing in terms of outward behavior and get to really the root of some of our students' needs. This graphic in the center is kind of a side-by-side of compliance-based approaches versus interoception-based approaches. And Kelly Mahler is an OT that really talks in depth about interoception. So helping kids acknowledge the feelings, learn the feelings in their body, or notice the signals in their body, taking an action to improve or support that. So really, helping kids honor their autonomy, right, while maintaining health and safety boundaries, looking below the surface of that behavior. And then the strategies that I'm going to share just kind of range from like foundational strategies to kind of more specific skills that you might need to teach. And I always give a shout out to Emily Rubin, who is one of the co-creators of SEEKS. So that stands for Social Emotional Engagement, Knowledge, and Skills. And it's a framework that actually involves teacher-to-teacher mentoring to kind of look at what's working in your classroom and where can you build off of that. And SEEKS really focuses on those 3 I's that you see. So initiation, independence, and investment. And for some of your students, you may have a lot of accommodations in the IEP, and these are just great universal tools to kind of look at those approaches through the lens of SEEKS. So kind of looking at, what tools do we use to sustain investment, right? Generating like topics that spark interest, having kids, have access to information so that they know what to do for the activity, right? And then initiation within the SEEKS framework is really being able to connect with other people. Like, so send information, show what you know in multiple ways. And the little graphic on the bottom is just kind of a nice way to, ask kids and build a culture in your classroom to say like, hey, does everybody have what they need for learning? Right? So does, maybe someone has a fidget, maybe someone likes to draw while they're listening, and just really normalizing that culture of, everybody has what they need, and we're gonna just make that part of our classroom. Just a couple foundational supports. So a lot of times if we have self-contained classrooms, starting with the environment is really key. So just making sure that, the environment supports the student's ability to attend. Are there clear visual or physical barriers to reduce stimulation? And do the students know what the rules and expectations are in the context of specific areas in the classroom? So if you're using supports like through like structured teach, this is something that is really outlined for you almost step by step when you're looking at the environment. But these are things that you can also consider as even a general education teacher. And then predictability supports, so offering students visual supports. Oftentimes what we'll see is, students are utilizing a visual schedule, right? Or they're using timers or countdown strips to help kids know when things are happening and at what time. And, sometimes kids, the visual schedules, I might hear somebody say like, oh, the first then isn't working, right? Or, that they're not really paying attention to the visual schedule. And sometimes it's really about the clarity. So this little first until next is from Autism Level Up. And the website is linked in the resource page at the end of this presentation, but they also provide not only first, but then they'll say until. So it's like first we'll do this activity, and then there's some kind of time marker. So it might say like until everybody's had a turn, and then next we're doing this activity. So that just helps pair a little bit more clarity around what is going to happen. And might offer some flexible thinking for students. And this is just another example of that. So you'll see like right in the center there, it's like first we're going to do animal dribbles until everyone has had a turn, and next we're going to dance. Sometimes I hear that there's a hesitation to use first then, because, you know, there's been intention in the past where students are on like a reward or a reinforcement system, and it's like first we're doing something that you probably won't enjoy, and next is the thing that you like, right? So these first thens are just kind of to give information, and then things like asking for a break or asking for a preferred activity, those things are always available. Students have the option to request those, and maybe there's a conversation around, you know, when that will happen. A couple other just visuals here, just, you know, something to note, like a change in routine for kids if something is different on the schedule. And then just some different examples of a variety of visual supports you might need. So just keeping in mind that all forms of communication are valid, right? So some of our students will communicate best with visual supports like a PEX system, a picture exchange system. Maybe they're using a communication board or an augmentative communication device. If you have kids that are using a lot of echolalia, if they're using phrases from movies or videos or TV shows, I would, you know, invite you to consider looking at the context clues. Think about when you hear those phrases and see if you can make a connection to what that might mean for that student. It's been really helpful in the past. And people kind of have these like aha moments, like, oh, like they're actually referring to this upcoming activity, or they actually have a question, right? So being able to shape some of those phrases is always really helpful. And then if you're working with littles, I just invite you to consider what's your goal for play, right? So, you know, are you using toys to facilitate development, right? Or to learn how to put something together like a potato head? You know, it's like we put in 5 pieces and then we're done. Or are we empowering engagement through those activities and toys that kids enjoy? So if you have kids that don't necessarily play as you would expect, you know, in terms of typical development and how toys are actually used, it's totally okay to, you know, if you have a student who really likes to drop items, it's like, let's get into that. Let's drop some items. Let's maybe drop them into water, and see how that builds a connection through play. And I have to say that all of these slides could probably be like a one-time training, but I'm just kind of hitting the high points for you, and we can talk about like questions and things like that. Just considerations for visual presentation for students. So if you have students that are really young, or maybe they're working on like work jobs, if you have them in a self-contained classroom, just considering what might make the most sense for a student. So if you're presenting a puzzle intact and you're giving it to the student and expecting them to kind of take it out and then put it back in, that might be confusing. So some students do much better if the pieces are already removed and their only task is to put them in. And then just on the left, or I'm sorry, on the right, just kind of showing a side-by-side comparison of, you know, here's a worksheet that, you know, might be passed out in like a 5th grade class, right? And if we have students that are really overwhelmed by that amount of problems, just having, you know, a modified version of that in terms of, you know, less information on the page, so that students can see what they need to do and they can see immediately when they're done. So talking about regulation, some of you may be really familiar with whole body listening, Larry. The original intent of that was to kind of create a tool to clarify, like, what are the subjective pieces of listening, right? How do we show we're listening? Um, Listening Larry got some feedback from the neurodivergent community and he got a glow up. Um, so there's been a shift in some of the Listening Larry materials. The Listen, Learn, and Grow book has some really great lessons attached to it. But really, the idea is helping students identify what their body needs to learn and kind of normalizing that that might include movement, that might include drawing, and that eye contact in the past has been weighted heavily as a signal that people show that they're listening, right? So kids can listen and learn in lots of different ways, and we don't necessarily need to make eye contact as a requirement for that. So we might talk about other ways that we will show that we're listening. Another little tool that I like is this kind of little body scan. So this really goes along with that interoception that I was referencing earlier. So this little graphic is great for students kind of doing like a systematic body scan, like how full is your brain? What emotions are you feeling? What's your temperature like? Oftentimes I'll have students that wear puffy coats all day long. And, and even as we get into the weather like we're having now, where it's like really hot in the afternoon and they're still wearing their puffy coat, if we do this check-in, oftentimes they're like, oh, you know what? I am really hot. And they'll take that jacket off and kind of make an adjustment. But just making sure that kids have their physical needs addressed, their energy levels, they've used the bathroom. This is a great thing to do at the beginning of the day, maybe after lunch. If you have a whole class, you can throw it up on the smart board and just say, okay, everybody check in. So that's just a tool that has been pretty successful for a lot of the students that I've been supporting. And then just knowing that there's lots of ways to help kids identify if they're regulated, right? Regulated just means your energy matches the task. And the 5-point scale and the zones of regulation are often connected to emotions or feelings, right? And they're graded. The energy meter on the bottom is also from Autism Level Up, and that is a great tool for kids who don't necessarily connect with emotion words, or maybe are associating like a 5 on the 5-point scale or the red zone as negative, right? Or as they're being bad or they shouldn't have those feelings. So just another way to help identify what energy is needed for an activity, and then kids can identify their energy and determine if they need to power up or power down before they start an activity. For some of our students in regular ed, a help box, this also comes from the SEEKS framework. This is a tool that just helps kids know what to do, right? So it might be like kind of the steps of an activity or information, but it always lives in a consistent place. So for this example, this was like a 5th grade math class, and their task was partner work. So they were supposed to get their materials, find their partner, and then they were walking around the room looking for arrays, drawing those arrays, and then when the timer is going off, they were able to return to their table. So it's something that would be static, right? So teachers give verbal directions. This is a tool where kids can reference if they forget what's happening next. And similarly, these are just kind of assigning group roles for group work. We have some students that are going to jump right in. Sometimes they're natural leaders, right? And they like to kind of organize the group. We have some students who might prefer to work alone. But defining the role, right, within the group is sometimes helpful. So just an idea to consider is, assigning specific roles or having kids draw these, like kind of like drawing straws or sticks, and then expanding roles for specific students as they're ready. So just an idea around group activities. And then just helping with initiation. So I know that many of our students struggle with just getting started with some of their tasks. And Sarah Ward is a speech language pathologist that does a lot of work with executive functioning and just kind of helping kids visualize the future, right? So the Ready Do Done is a great way to break down big assignments or break down like multi-step tasks. On the done side, you see that's kind of where you begin. Like, so, we're going to do the project. Here's a sample of what it looks like. Here's the steps that we'll need to do to complete it. And here's the materials we need to get ready. And if you have a smart board, there is an app that you can have a clock and you can assign a certain amount of minutes to each of those time slots. So to get ready, we have about 5-6 minutes. We have about 15 minutes to do the actual activity, and then about 5 minutes to wrap up and consider ourselves done. So just helping with time management and kind of giving kids a way to visualize like their future tasks. For older students, if you have high school students or transition students, I just want you to consider Goblin Tools. This is a free web-based app. There's an app or there's just the actual website. But there's a variety of tools on this website, and it was created, designed by and for neurodivergent people. So the Magic To Do actually creates like a task analysis or a to-do list. So you could type in like, I don't know, like washing the dishes, right? And you can choose, there's a little pepper, and they say like choose your spicy level. So if you want it very broken down, you can choose like 3 peppers. If you want just kind of like a basic idea, you can click like 1 pepper. And like the compiler creates a list from like a brain dump. So you can actually voice to text, like these are all the things I need to do. And it will map out those to-do lists for you. There's an estimator to kind of figure out how long an activity might take. A chef app, the chef option, if you have a bunch of ingredients and you type them in, it will give you some recipe ideas. There's also some features where you could put in an email, right? And you could formalize it or you could make it informal. And it'll kind of adjust the language for you if you're sending a message to someone. It will also interpret a message for you. So it's called the judge. And if you have an email that you're not quite sure how to interpret the message, that will give you an estimate of what that might be. So Goblin Tools. Just a few considerations for social stories. Social stories are super helpful for our students. They are meant to be individualized. And I know that people are on teacher pay teachers and we're trying to save time and we're trying to get pre-made items. Just something to consider when you are utilizing those is that you're looking for social stories that do not have an expectation of compliance, right? Compliance meaning that there's an expectations that students will compromise their needs, right, or their comfort in order to follow directions. So kind of on the left, I have a little example, like when I don't want to work with a partner, I say no, and that's not okay. We want that student to advocate, right? We want to say, is there another option or is there another person that we could work with? So there's just kind of some tips for creating a social story, making sure that there's strategies, making sure that there is some kind of person that has been identified that the student can go to access help. And just this is kind of along those lines of why being able to say no and honor no is important. So honoring a student's advocacy is really important in the long term, right? So being able to say no, being able to be non-compliant means that a student can be sexually safe, right? So as students get older, that's something to consider. This is not an invitation to invite chaos into your classroom, right? We're still going to maintain healthy boundaries, health and safety. Some of our students do need assistance making good decisions. But if we do hear no, get curious about why. And let's see what we can adjust within that activity or within the environment to help the no decrease. We're just not forcing compliance, right? So that's the main takeaway from that one. And I just have a few considerations here for social communication. Oftentimes when we are looking at social skills content for students, The focus is often on making students adjust to neurotypical standards, right? So making sure before we do that, that we understand the double empathy problem, right? So if two autistic individuals are communicating, that interaction goes really well. If two neurotypical individuals are interacting, that usually goes pretty well. When we have a neurotypical person and an autistic person, that's where we get the double empathy problem, right? So we're struggling to kind of read between the lines or recognize that empathy may be presented in a different way. Or it may not be necessarily apparent that an autistic person is showing empathy. So both parties are struggling, but we need to build more understanding of each other's communication style rather than putting the responsibility just on the autistic person to kind of conform. So that's kind of just what I wanted to share about this piece. For kids that like to share a lot of information at once about something they love, autistic individuals call that info dumping. There's just a little graphic of how to respond to that. So just an example, if we really need to move on in class, kind of saying like, our brains are really full right now. I get you're really passionate about this. Like we're going to move on. So just kind of giving a little bit of gentler, safer language for kids to accept that feedback. And then I just have a couple strategies kind of unpacking social situations. So contingency maps just help visualize the outcome of situations and kind of giving two choices. So I had a student that really needed his iPad to be charged at 100%. Perfection was important. And he did an exercise routine in the morning where he would use the treadmill and listen to his playlist, and then he would, go do his next activity. But one day I could hear him from the other room saying, it's 65%, it's 65%. So we had to kind of break down a sticky situation, which was his language, and he connected to that. So I said, okay, we have a sticky situation. The iPad is at 65%. These are your options, right? So you can charge it now. And that means you won't have the iPad for the treadmill and you'll have to listen to the radio, which won't have your favorite songs. Or you can do the treadmill, listen to the iPad, and then you can charge it after the workout. And just kind of helping that supported decision-making process really helped kind of avoid that paralysis with problem solving and kind of create a compromise. There's two other items here. One is just kind of like a social autopsy. It's similar to social behavior mapping. So just helping kids understand, was there a miscommunication? How did that impact other people? What can we do next time, right? And then the stop and notice helps kids kind of read the room. So it's kind of breaking that down of looking at the space, the time, the objects, and then the people. And then this is a little graphic in the resource folder that I will share. There is a document called Parachutes and Ladders. And this is just kind of a quick reference tool for educational assistants to say like, all right, like if my student is not engaged, let me see what areas I should maybe look at, right? So kind of looking at, are their basic needs met? Are they connecting with people, or do they maybe need to be alone? Do they have communication tools? Do they understand the task? Is there enough information to complete the task? Are we addressing their sensory needs? Are we addressing their energy? So just kind of breaking that down in a way that you can kind of do a quick problem solve and maybe adjust what the supports are. And that's it. I hope that that was okay time-wise, but just a few takeaways here. Just remembering that, the work is ongoing. Maybe inviting you to consider what's working well in your classroom, and then maybe where do you want to go next? And does it maybe include one of these strategies, or kind of exploring a little more information around